I never believed in the kind of love that breaks you open and puts you back together differently. The kind that makes you realize you've been living half a life, waiting for someone to show you what wholeness feels like. But then Marcus walked into my hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon, and everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, about what it means to let someone in, it all just shattered. I was 29 when the diagnosis came. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words felt foreign in my mouth when I tried to say them out loud to my parents over the phone. They lived in Portland, I was in Chicago. I'd moved here 5 years ago for a job in marketing, built what I thought was a pretty good life. Nice apartment in Lakeview, a solid group of friends, weekend brunches and summer festivals. I was out, confident, living authentically for the first time since college. And then my body decided to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. The first round of chemo hit me like a freight train. I'd read about the side effects, watched YouTube videos, thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Nothing prepares you for that level of exhaustion, that bone-deep nausea, the way your own reflection becomes a stranger. I lost my hair in chunks over the sink, watching it swirl down the drain like pieces of my old identity washing away. My friends visited at first, brought flowers and magazines and uncomfortable cheerfulness, but hospital rooms have a way of revealing who can handle your suffering and who can't. The visits became less frequent. Phone calls replaced bedside conversations, then texts, then silence punctuated by occasional "thinking of you" messages that felt more like checking a box than genuine connection. I didn't blame them. I was a mirror reflecting their worst fears, a reminder that bodies fail, that youth doesn't guarantee tomorrow. I'd been alone for 3 days when Marcus arrived. Not metaphorically alone, actually alone. No visitors, just nurses checking vitals and doctors discussing treatment protocols like I was a case study instead of a person. I was staring at the ceiling, counting the tiles for the 100th time when I heard a knock. Not the perfunctory knock of medical staff, but an actual asking permission knock. "Come in," I said, assuming it was another nurse. The door opened and this man walked in, tall, maybe 6'1", with dark skin that seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. He wore dark jeans and a green Henley that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. He carried a book in one hand and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were already friends, even though I'd never seen him before in my life. "Hey," he said. "I'm Marcus. I'm a volunteer with the Patient Companion Program. Your nurse mentioned you might appreciate some company." I almost laughed. Patient Companion Program. It sounded so clinical, so organized. Like loneliness was just another symptom they could treat with scheduled visits. "I'm okay," I said, which was maybe the biggest lie I'd ever told. "You don't have to stay." He pulled up the chair beside my bed anyway, settling in like he had nowhere else to be. "Mind if I sit for a bit? I brought a book, but I'm happy to just be quiet if you prefer." Something about the way he said it, the genuine optionality, made me not want him to leave. "What book?" He held it up. "The Overstory by Richard Powers. Have you read it?" I shook my head. "What's it about?" "Trees, mostly, and people, and how we're all connected in ways we don't understand." He opened it to a dog-eared page. "Want me to read to you? No pressure, but sometimes it's nice to have something to focus on besides the IV drip." I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe because his voice was warm and steady, or because he didn't look at me with pity, or because I was so desperately tired of the silence. He read for an hour that first day, and I found myself getting lost in the words, in the rhythm of his voice, in the temporary escape from my body's rebellion. When he stood to leave, he placed the book on my bedside table. "I'll be back tomorrow if you'd like. Same time." "Why?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Why would you want to come back?" He paused at the door, considering. Because everyone deserves company. Because hospitals are lonely. Because I have the time and you might need it. He smiled. And because you seem like someone worth knowing. He came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. At first, he just read. We worked our way through the overstory, then started on Ocean Vuong's On Earth. We're briefly gorgeous. Sometimes I'd drift off while he was reading, and I'd wake to find him still there. Book open, voice steady. Other times I'd interrupt with questions about his life, and he'd tell me about his work as a social worker, about growing up in Atlanta, about his grandmother who raised him and taught him that showing up was the most radical form of love. 3 weeks into his visits, I had a bad night, the kind where the pain breaks through the medication and you're convinced you're dying alone in a sterile room surrounded by machines that beep but don't care. I was sobbing when Marcus arrived the next afternoon, my eyes still swollen, my chest tight with residual panic. Rough night? He asked softly, taking his usual seat. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Want to talk about it? And suddenly I did. I told him everything. About the fear that lived in my chest like a second tumor. About feeling abandoned by friends who couldn't handle my illness. About my parents who loved me but didn't understand me. Who'd struggled with my sexuality and now struggled with my mortality. About feeling like I was disappearing, like the person I'd worked so hard to become was being erased by disease and treatment. Marcus listened, really listened, didn't try to fix it or minimize it or offer platitudes about fighting and staying positive. When I finished, he reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm against mine, and I realized how long it had been since someone had touched me with tenderness instead of clinical necessity. You're still here, he said. You're still you. This thing happening to your body, it's not erasing who you are. It's just another part of your story. A shitty part, I said, but I didn't let go of his hand. Yeah, a really shitty part. But you're living it with courage, and that matters. Something shifted between us that day. The visits became less about distraction and more about connection. We talked about everything. Our coming out stories, our first loves, our heartbreaks. He told me about losing his grandmother to cancer 2 years ago, about how helpless he'd felt, about how volunteering was his way of honoring her memory. I told him about the life I'd built in Chicago, about the career I'd put on hold, about dreams that felt simultaneously crucial and meaningless when you're fighting to survive. 6 weeks into treatment, I had to tell him to stop coming, not because I wanted him to leave, but because I was falling in love with him, and that felt impossibly cruel. To develop feelings for someone when you might not have a future, to pull him deeper into the gravity of my illness, to need him the way I was starting to need him. Marcus, you don't have to keep coming, I said one afternoon, pulling my hand away when he reached for it. I'm sure you have other patients who need you. He studied my face. Is that what you want? For me to stop visiting? It's not about what I want. It's about what's fair. You signed up to be a volunteer, not to get attached to someone who might not make it. Hey, his voice was firm. Don't do that. Don't make decisions for me about what I can handle. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need you to be honest with me. Is this about me, or is this about you being scared? I looked away, tears burning behind my eyes. Both. I'm terrified, Marcus. I'm terrified of how much I look forward to your visits, how much I need you, how much it's going to hurt when you realize this is too much and you stop coming. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved his chair closer to the bed, close enough that our knees touched. I'm not going anywhere, you hear me? I'm not your friends who couldn't handle it. I'm not some volunteer doing charity work. I come here because I want to be here, because somewhere along the way, you became important to me. Marcus, I'm falling for you, he he said simply. I have been for weeks. And yeah, the circumstances are complicated and scary, but that doesn't make it less real. You don't get to push me away because you're trying to protect me from hypothetical pain. I started crying then, full, ugly crying, because I'd been so alone, and here was this man offering me exactly what I needed and was most afraid to accept. He climbed onto the bed beside me, careful of the IV lines, and held me while I shook. His heartbeat was steady against my ear, his arms solid around my fragile body. I'm scared, I whispered. I know, me too, but we can be scared together. After that, everything changed and nothing changed. He still came every day, still read to me, still held my hand. But now there was acknowledgement of what was building between us. Now when I woke from nightmares, I could text him and he'd call, talking me down from the panic. Now he'd bring my favorite soup from the deli down the street, feeding me when I was too weak to hold the spoon myself. The night I spiked a fever and had to be moved to ICU, Marcus was there within 20 minutes. The nurses tried to enforce visiting hours, but he somehow convinced them to let him stay. He sat in that uncomfortable chair beside my bed, his hand wrapped around mine, while my temperature climbed and the doctors worked to bring it down. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time I surfaced, he was there. You should go home, I mumbled at some point in the early morning hours. Get some sleep. I'm exactly where I need to be, he said, squeezing my hand. When the fever finally broke 2 days later, when I opened my eyes and could focus clearly for the first time in 48 hours, Marcus was asleep in the chair, his head resting on the edge of my bed, still holding my hand. His face was creased from the awkward position, stubble darkening his jaw. He looked exhausted and beautiful, and I felt my heart crack open even wider. I touched his hair gently and he stirred, blinking awake. When he saw me looking at him, really looking at him, his whole face transformed with relief. Hey, he said softly. Hey, yourself. You look like hell. He laughed, the sound rough with fatigue. You're one to talk. I have an excuse. What's yours? I was worried about you. He sat up, stretching. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck, but better, definitely better. I paused. Thank you for staying. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And the devastating thing was, I believed him. This man who had walked into my room as a stranger had become the most constant presence in my life. He knew me at my worst, my weakest, my most afraid, and he stayed anyway. The treatment stretched on. Good days and bad days. Progress and setbacks. Through it all, Marcus was there. He learned my medication schedule better than I knew it. He advocated for me with nurses when I was too tired to speak up for myself. He brought me books and podcasts and stories from the outside world. He made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. 3 months into treatment, I had my first clear scan. The leukemia was in remission. I remember the doctor saying the words, remember the relief flooding through me. Remember immediately wanting to tell Marcus. He was at work, but he answered on the second ring. It's working, I said, my voice breaking. The treatment is working. I'm in remission. I heard him exhale, heard the emotion in his breathing. Oh, thank God, thank God. I might actually get out of here. You're getting out of here. You're going to get well, and you're going to live your life, and it's going to be beautiful. When he visited that evening, he brought flowers. Not the typical hospital flowers, but a small potted orchid. So you can take it with you when you leave, he explained. Something living to remind you of your strength. I was released from the hospital a week later. The transition was strange and terrifying. I'd spent so long in that room that the outside world felt too big, too bright, too full of possibilities I'd stopped believing in. My apartment felt foreign. I was weak, still recovering, still facing months of outpatient treatment and monitoring. Marcus helped me settle back in, stocked my fridge, organized my medications, And then he stood in my living room, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain for the first time since I'd known him. "So," he said, "I guess my official volunteer duties are done now that you're discharged." My heart sank. This was it. The moment he'd realized he'd fulfilled his obligation and could return to his normal life. "Right, of course. You've already done so much more than anyone could expect." He stepped closer. "I wasn't finished. My volunteer duties are done, but I was hoping I could keep visiting in a different capacity." "What capacity?" "As someone who's completely in love with you. As someone who wants to take you on actual dates when you're feeling strong enough. As someone who wants to be part of your life, not as a volunteer, but as whatever you'll let me be." I couldn't breathe. "You love me?" "I love you. I've loved you for months. I love your strength and your vulnerability and your terrible jokes when you're on pain medication. I love how you've faced this impossible thing with grace. I love who you are when you're scared and who you are when you're hopeful. I love you, and I want to build something real with you, if you want that too." I crossed the distance between us, still weak, but determined. When I kissed him, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. His arms wrapped around me carefully, and I could feel him smiling against my lips. "I love you too," I whispered. "I've been in love with you since you first held my hand." "That was week 3, he said. "I know." He laughed, pulling me closer. "We could have been doing this for months." We were doing this for months. We were falling in love in that hospital room. Every page you read, every time you showed up, every moment you chose to stay. "I'll always choose to stay," he said, and he did. Through the rest of my recovery, through the fear of relapse, through the slow rebuilding of my strength and my life. He stayed for the first time I could walk around the block without getting winded. He stayed for my 6-month clear scan and my 1-year clear scan. He stayed when I went back to work part-time, when I had panic attacks about every ache and pain, when I struggled with survivor's guilt and PTSD from the trauma of treatment. He stayed because that's what love is, not just the dramatic gestures, but the everyday choice to show up, to sit beside someone's bed even when they tell you to leave, to see someone at their absolute worst and decide they're worth fighting for, to believe in a future together even when the present is uncertain. It's been 3 years since my diagnosis, 3 years since Marcus walked into my hospital room and changed everything. We're engaged now, planning a wedding for next spring. I'm healthy, strong, back to my full-time job and full life. The orchid he brought me is still alive, thriving on our kitchen windowsill, in the apartment we share. Sometimes I think about who I was before the diagnosis, the person who thought he had life figured out, who kept people at arm's length, who was so afraid of vulnerability that he never let anyone truly see him. That person had to die so this version of me could be born, the version that knows how to accept love, how to be seen in weakness and darkness, how to trust that some people will stay. Marcus taught me that, not through words, but through action, through showing up day after day in that hospital room, through holding my hand when I was most afraid, through loving me not despite my brokenness but through it, seeing something worth cherishing in my most vulnerable moments. I never believed in the kind of love that breaks you open and puts you back together differently. But now I know it's the only kind of love worth having. The kind that sits beside your bed even when you tell them to leave. The kind that stays